The argument, of course, there are two parts, history and law. I was looking around just now, just making some curiosity, uh, trying to find out what could be maybe the oldest constitution in the world. Do you know the one that they showed me? The one in San Marino. At San Marino, they said is the longest, the oldest constitution because the document have been in operation since 1600. I said, wow, this is very interesting. So, in light of this, can you share with me maybe some ancient treaty that we can reference in Africa, in ancient Africa?
Yeah, wow. I guess they just did not know, right? So yeah, you have so many different treaties. So one treaty is the treaty between the Mesopotamian cities of Lagash and Umma in 3100 BCE. The treaty between the Mesopotamian cities and Supalumia. And treaties entail that they would have to have some form of constitution, but these are just treaties between two different leaders in the city to get whatever that they wanted. You also have King of the Hittites and King of Mitanni, Shatwasa, 1350 BCE. This is before Christ. And then you have the Treaty of Pharaoh Ramses II with the King of Hittites and Hatsuli III, 1276 BCE. In addition, you also, to get into like the very ancient constitution in the Mali Empire, or the Charter of Kukan Kuga, Mandine Charter in 1230, 1600 AD, they have one of the world's oldest constitutions, and that predates like 1600 of what he was saying. At this time, the Mali Empire would have stretched from the Sahara Desert to the West African coast, so that's about 500,000 square miles. And this is during the reign of Mansa Musa. And so this included Senegal, southern Mauritania, Mali, northern Burkina Faso, western Niger, the Gambia, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Cote d'Ivoire, and northern Ghana. And this constitution was very progressive. It recognized civil rights and outlaws. It recognized children's education as a societal responsibility, which is something that we see it has been neglected in African countries now, and even in America with the children there. Like it has been neglected, it has been changed in order to control young minds, to only have them believe that they need to, live to get a job. Women's participation in all community management and decision-making processes. You don't see that in Western society until the early 1900s, I guess, or maybe, no, not even the early 1900s, mid 1900s is where you see white people starting to include the white woman and stuff. But that was something that was existent in African societies already, right? You have consular protection, good faith and fair dealing, the obligation to help the most vulnerable. This is something that's used to be very, very important in communal societies in different African communities, because they believe that if, let's say, for example, there was an older woman and she needed help, or she was hungry and you didn't help her, then it would bring curse onto that village. I don't know if you have any stories or know anything about that.
Well, say I have read it from a book, no, but that I have seen it live, absolutely. You see, yeah, but because that is, the thing is that I think the constitution that you are talking about, most of these things are actually the way of life of the people across Africa. Of course, I'm not talking of African cities, because African cities are just a replicant of European city. When we say African society or African culture, as it were, that is not really what we are talking about. So in this African culture where I grew or where I live, I can tell you, when I was much smaller, I've seen my father go to cultivate his farmland. He will cultivate his yam, his cassava. In the day of the feast of New Year festival, there are other people who cannot cultivate. Some of these ones, not the one that have children. Because if you have children, you cannot cultivate. Your children will be able to provide for you. But there are those who do not have anyone to take care of them. The government is not coming to take care of them. It is this individual. Nobody is telling them, hey, go and give something to them. They know that it is their obligation to take from what they have and give to this individual that have nothing. I have witnessed it. Now, I witnessed it from my father giving us 2 bags of yam. Go and give to this old woman because she needed it. So this is to tell you that that constitution is not just in philosophy. It's a way of life of the people. I've seen it.
Exactly. I guess for the sake of people understanding how these things existed, like naturally, it was just embedded in the interactions of African people. It's better for people to understand if we say it was law. But that's why I was going to the factor of how law was conceptualized with the African people was they were the law, right? Like almost like it like, because what is law, right? Law is an agreement as to how you're going to interact with other people within your community. It's an agreement that everyone has accepted almost. It's like a social contract, but instead of it being between the ruled and the rulers, it's amongst each other as a community. So it's almost like we have to look at law differently than what we view it as in the Western world, which is really interesting. But yeah, so that one's a really important one. The obligations help the most vulnerable, like I said, property ownership, marriage, legislative representation, dowry, and the return of lost property. The charter also outlawed offending women, violence against women, poor treatment of emissaries, the abuse of servants, infidelity, social betrayal, the keeping of lost property, and the humiliation of enemies. So all of these things were existent. Alongside there is an existence of international law, right? Because like I said, there was Africans who were traveling a lot, like they were going to different continents already. And also this is a different time frame. So we have to remember that over time, continents begin to spread apart more and more and more. But also you have African groups of people that were known as Moors, and oftentimes that was related to the sea because they were able to know specific sea routes. They knew how to travel using the stars as a map, and they were really good at navigation. I think that they influenced almost a lot of different, almost every single culture as to how to navigate across the world. I think some people try to say that there was an ancient kingdom in China that created the first boat, but from my knowledge, it was the Moors, the African people, because they were traveling predating all of that. Like in order for the Chinese to have been Chinese, the Africans would have needed to travel to China, essentially. So that's really interesting because international law initially emerged as rules of conduct, binding on priority states of the people in international relations, like transactions of trade and marriage, and problems with international cooperation in criminal matters such as extradition.
Is it that when Europeans started to engage with Africans, they didn't know of this law? They didn't understand it. They knew of it. They didn't understand it. They just say, okay, it's not there. So they have to write out everything. Does it mean that when they were coming to West Africa or coming to other part of Africa other than North Africa, who were just very close to them, is it that they didn't understand it, so for this reason they decide to write it off, or they just decide to ignore it?
I honestly, that's a good question. I've read a book by Marimba Annie called Yurugu, and she tries to deconstruct like the philosophy of white people, like how why were they thinking like this? How did this come about? And it's really interesting. It's kind of similar to the Francis Welsing theory, as far as them being in a much more colder environment, or colder, cloudy, rainy environment that caused them to live by this deprivation means, versus Africans living in abundance. So they have an abundance mindset, so they don't mind sharing. Like, yes, they were fighting over time, but they didn't recognize that they were fighting an entire system. Like they probably were fighting like some soldiers from Germany, but when they had people from, I'm just giving an example, when they had people from, let's say, Netherlands come in, they didn't see them as a threat as well, if that makes sense. Like they didn't see the white man as a threat because that wasn't a part of their philosophy. They saw another being. They're like, okay, well, how can I help? How can I feed you? And then that kindness was used against them, essentially. And then once they realized it, they did try to fight. But when they saw, I think that real African people, our ancestors didn't realize what they were planning until it was too late, essentially.